Sir. Do you have a ride at least? That black car? All right. Adam texted. I have one male at the address 13 was just at. He's refusing to leave. Thank you. "13, come back down that road now. It's coming our way." It's headed right for us. It's headed right for us, man. I was just there.
069, you're 7.
Unless you want to die. Hurry the Dave! I don't want to die in this.
Go ahead.
I'm sounding the alarm. Or maybe I'm ringing the school bell. Because quite frankly, right now, lives hang in the balance. No question about it. I am so concerned that high civilian casualties from fires are in our nearer future in this country than we realize. So, we're ringing the bell. We're all in the struggle together. Everybody has a different role in this.
The fire problem is the lack of fire. The fire solution, more fire. That's the crazy thing, that we have all of the capacity to change all of this stuff. We have the technical knowledge, the scientific knowledge, and we have the ability to change our organization and our understanding, public understanding. And yet we don't do it. But what it takes is a shift in the way people think about fire.
Rise, guide me to the light. Oh, how I breathe the night, breathe the night. Rise, break out from the rust. See every captive free to shake thy dust.
The fires that we've seen in the West in the last decade or 2 decades or 3 even are poster children for the fire problem. They're uncontrollable. They're burning with higher intensity. Fires had always been there, but it was a completely different kind of fire, and it sustained those ecosystems rather than destroyed them. The underlying problem here is that the harder we fight fire, the harder we fight against it, the worse it gets. Without periodic removal by fire and combustion, the biomass accumulates every year. If you're constantly removing fire, it accumulates. And so the fuel accumulation and the changes in our ecosystems, we are creating the worst conditions that we possibly could.
We have this fire paradox, where the more we fight fire, the more fuels build up. The more fuels build up, the more fire becomes challenging and likely to escape and cause damage. So we have to try even harder. So that's a positive feedback loop that just keeps sending us to more and more challenging environments and gets us worse outcomes. The more you win, the stronger your enemy gets. And your enemy really isn't an enemy, it's a natural process. So why would you do battle with something that only gets stronger when you win? And overall, you're losing, So you win a battle and you're gonna lose the war. And so I think we're seeing that, and society's recognizing more and more that we're spending more, we're trying harder, our firefighters are exhausted, they're incredibly stressed, strained, and yet it gets worse. So we've got to try something different.
So there's a fuel structure completely different now than what we saw even in the early 90s. We're hotter, we're drier, things are changing climate-wise. Back in the early 90s, when I first started, a big fire season for the hot shots back then was 400 or 500 hours of overtime. By the early 2000s, it was pretty much standard that hot shots were pushing 1,000 hours of overtime a year over that. So somewhere between 1,000 and 1,800. The ecosystem needs fire. We have to teach our public that fire is part of the ecosystem and we cannot truly actually stop the ecosystem from doing what it's going to do. That's like saying we're going to stop bugs from coming into the national forest. It's not going to happen. Firefighters are incredibly smart. And I think intuitively, firefighters understand, they know that the ecosystem needs fire. But some of our firefighters are 20, 30 years in the culture of fighting fire. It's just their first line of defense is to go to something they're comfortable in. Didn't matter what it was doing or where it was at. Each fire got a line put around it. As I've just continued my own journey, using science and dropping my own ego, I would look at it now and say, what are the values at risk, and is it worth putting someone in there to protect any given value?
The story of the management of fire in the modern era, it starts obviously with the European settlement of the West and recognizing that the Native Americans really defined this landscape through fire. As the Europeans started to settle the West and push the Native Americans into reservations and worse, a European mentality of controlling nature emerged. The Forest Service itself was founded by Gifford Pinchot, and Pinchot learned his forestry in Germany in the Black Forest, which was a very controlled environment.
So he comes in with a scientific education, and he hires a whole series of individuals who have a new scientific, this progressive era and new scientific background in the study of forestry. And the goal of forestry is to grow trees. The goal of a forester is to protect those trees. And they have no other job but to grow and protect those trees. That is what a forester, according to this era of science, does. And so to say that you're going to let fires burn is anathema to them. Are you going to let nature do its thing on the forested lands? No, that's our future. That's our economy. That's our ability to grow as a nation. And we are going to do everything we can to stop that. It really got promoted as a controlling issue after the big fires of 1910.
Records show that 59% of all the fires in 1910 were caused by the railroads alone. About 3 million acres, it's estimated, burned in the Northern Rockies, right along the Montana-Idaho divide. The railroads were burning wood in the engines, and cinders would fly out of the stack. On August 20th in 1910, fairly strong wind took these fires and spread them to the east. These giant swaths of the Idaho Divide area burning, and a lot of these burned into populated areas. I mean, the 1910 fires, had a huge influence on a lot that we do in the Forest Service, and really catalyzed our approach to suppressing fires.
Again, you have to see it through the eyes of these individuals who have a job, and their job is to protect and grow these trees. You're not going to let your resources be destroyed if you can help it.
The formation of the Forest Service in the early 1900s, the Great Burn in 1910, really kind of galvanizing society's recognition that we need to do something about fire, and if only we worked harder and managed harder, we could have better outcomes around fire in our forests. And I think that's evolved over time.
Even before 1910, fires were being removed. But after that, it was an official function of the Forest Service to remove fire, and policy was developed around that. By 1935, this policy was codified in the 10 a.m. policy. The 10 a.m. policy specified that any fire would be put out completely by 10 a.m. the next day, and all necessary resources brought in to attempt to achieve that. And that 10 a.m. policy was the official policy up through the mid-1970s. But a couple of things happened that changed the way we started to look at fire policy. One was that we realized we weren't getting rid of fires. And so the more money we spent on removing fire, the more money we spent on removing fire, and the worse the fires got. And this was obvious to people in Washington, D.C. who were keeping track of this. But the other thing that was happening was the awareness by the Park Service and their adoption of policies for introducing fire to manage their ecosystems. And so there was pressure from the Park Service on the Forest Service to actually adopt some of these ideas. We were no longer going to simply be reactive. We were going to use fire and factor fire processes into land management. It was a lot of optimism. Wilderness fire was taking off. There was tremendous enthusiasm for having fires burning in our wilderness areas. Unfortunately, it didn't last. "1988 was a milestone in the wrong direction for a lot of these programs. It took a lot of the momentum out of the program for everyone, not just the Park Service, but also for the Forest Service. The Yellowstone ecosystem has burned many times. One of the things that we can do to facilitate this cycle of renewal is to allow fires to burn and to manage those with the expectation that they're going to do things that appear to be extreme behavior, but it's totally normal for those ecosystems. It's just not controllable, it's not suppressible. But without it, those species wouldn't survive. And so this wasn't an ecological disaster of any kind, but politically it was. But slowly we began re-implementing the natural fire policies. Unfortunately, a fire that occurred in the year 2000 went on to burn Los Alamos. The entire situation was so bad, a prescription against prescribed burning was implemented, and this affected all of the prescribed burning programs throughout the Park Service and even the Forest Service. By 2009, federal fire policy received new direction. This 2009 policy guidance gave responsibility to incident management teams that were primarily focused on suppression. Their culture was entirely about putting fires out. They didn't have an appreciation of managing fires, no patience to manage fires for the long term, and to incorporate local management objectives into managing those fires. And so this 2009 policy guidance essentially shut down the fire use modules. The problem is that the incident management teams still have not risen to the level that they were expected to be able to manage these incidents with a wide variety of objectives and sensitivity to the long-term benefits of having fire on the land. And so I think the policy had unintended consequences. As far as the darkest years in fire suppression, we're in those right now. We're spending inordinate amounts of money, billions and billions of dollars, and getting nothing for it. We're not protecting our communities, we're not protecting our wildland values, and we keep spending and doing all of the things that we have done for a century. So yeah, we're not out of it, we're not crawling out of it. The collective realization has not occurred yet that we're not winning.
Lightning goes off and, starts like 6, 7 fires in the hills. Our default is you go in and you send the jumpers or the helicopter or whatever you're gonna send to it, and you send them in there, and that's like a no-brainer. Duh, just do that. Until that's like the alternative that you need to assess, you're not gonna get out of it. We put out 97% of fires under a certain size threshold during the first 24 to 48 hours. That's currently how we communicate that we're so successful at what we do. The 3% that we don't do that to burn almost all of the acres. So if that's the way that we're putting ourselves up as successful, that's a really bad way to measure our success. So number one, we need to figure out a better way.
The fire paradox, which is, as we talked earlier, the more you fight fire, the more you have to fight fire, and the worse off you're going to be. But there's also something called the firefighting trap, and it's basically, as a organization starts to have problems, you'll have these people that come forward and can deal with the problem and are very good at reacting to a problem and solving that problem. And over time, those kinds of people get emphasized, and that kind of reactive approach kind of takes over an organization. And the folks that are good at kind of avoiding problems ever happening, by mitigating problems, they become less relevant in that organization's culture. And so you have basically an organization that is focused on the reactive problem solving and not addressing the fundamental issues.
In Colorado, we had an air tanker go down that was fatal for the pilot, and so that was pretty horrible. And they're good firemen, they're good firefighters, they're really good firefighters, and but you know, they have the same bias up there for action or for doing things that we have on the ground. You know, once they're up, they're going to do something. We need to make sure that where we're using aviation is actually going to make a difference. We want to make sure that we use it at the appropriate place, the appropriate time, to really limit the money and limit the exposure that we put the aviators at.
Okay, this can work.
When scarcity is introduced in a fire system, it sure seems like people tend to make better choices with what is actually important. Conversely, when you're not constrained by resources, if you're the only game in town, you're going to get everything you ask for. That's just a given, right? You've got a fire, that hill is on fire again, and I have like this whole fire industrial system worth of stuff that I can throw at it. What do you want? It's not a good way to get good decisions made, and it's not a good way to deal with people's lives. We have to start thinking differently in fire response. What is important on this landscape that we need to protect, and what is the best way to do that?
I didn't get any of that shit. I got fucking bones, I got carrots.
Look, I got a steak in here.
Yeah, but like, where's your spoon and fork and shit? Oh.
Just need some there.
Some leftover bread.
Yeah.
When we hurt firefighters or when we fail and burn homes or lose things, we all have a little bit of empath in us, and when we see those foundations or burnt homes, we intuitively know that's someone's livelihood, that's someone's life. You know, that's a tick, that's a scar on our head.
We walked about while the whole world was sleeping.
I don't compare like what we do to any kind of greatness. It's just what we do. We end up going out there and we end up risking something to save something. Oftentimes, political pressure, local pressure have pushed us into doing things maybe that were not smart and doing it in a way that is not smart as well. The global climate, fuel structure, obviously some things have changed, and yet I would say that, you know, largely our management has not. We continue to suppress fires.
You've got your signs that say firefighters are heroes and all this kind of stuff. It's my job to make them not be heroes so that they don't have to do heroic things. Because, you know, the whole thing about a hero it doesn't usually work out so well for them.
Okay, so we're here in a second growth ponderosa pine mixed conifer forest. This hasn't been burned in probably about a century. By removing fire, what we've done is we've allowed all these small trees to come in, and they will continue to grow and to continue to fill in until this is a very, very dense forest. We're looking inside this tree, and it tells us a lot about what this forest was like and what it experienced. On the order of about every 10 years, a fire used to come through here. These large trees, they weren't killed. They were simply scarred repeatedly. Those fires left the large trees in the forest, killed off the small ones, consumed all of this litter and this stuff that we're seeing here, consumed all of this, and thereby made this area safe for future fires. But the problem with just cutting trees, if our goal is to reduce the hazard to this forest, just cutting these trees does not remove all of this fuel on the ground. Okay, this fuel here is many inches deep, and this will burn for a very long time. Most of the energy, most of the heat energy stored on this site is stored in the material on the ground. And only by doing only mechanical thinning, we are not removing any of this. It leaves almost all of the stored heat energy stored on site. So this area was just prescribed burn in spring, so that would be just 4 or 5 months ago. You don't see very many very small trees coming in. The fire killed and consumed all of the very small Douglas fir trees that were invading the understory here. The other thing, if you look throughout this stand, there's no litter and no duff. Fire consumed all of those kind of surface fuel materials. So all of this resprouting low vegetation sprouted back vegetatively since the fire, just in spring. This is exactly the kind of fire that these forest species are tolerant of and adapted to. You're seeing some char on the trunks of these trees, right? That doesn't hurt them. These trees are going to be just fine. They're going to survive. They have very thick bark that's normal for them. Many people would look at this forest, and other than the char on the bark, they may not even know that it was prescribed burn. But a wildfire would know that this is prescribed burn. And its behavior would be very, very different in here compared to other forests that even had been thinned. They have the same forest structure, but they don't have the same fuel structure on the ground. So that's why stands like this can survive wildfires, even under extreme conditions, where stands that have just been thinned don't.
When you do good risk reduction work, you are stopping a future disaster. But you rarely get credit for it because the disaster didn't happen. Doing that work 10 years ahead of time and creating a prescribed burn program and burning out a landscape consecutively and consistently, those are the places where we avoid the disasters.
Guide me to the light. Oh, how I breathe the night, breathe the night. Rise, break out from the rise. See every captive free to shake that
What we study is decision making and risk management in wildfire response. So in that stage of existence where there is a fire and people are going to do something about it, that's where we're trying to insert like risk management and some decision making science into things. So the initial idea to any fire is like, okay, it's here. Do I need to do anything about it for the next week, for the next 2 weeks? Where am I at seasonally? Like, what are the drought conditions out there? What is the fire even doing? Is it gonna grow?
Fire suppression is really using what we call direct perimeter control. Or you do everything you can to keep that fire as small as you possibly can. There is no discussion or option to thinking about any other approach but to keep that fire, that wildland fire, as small as you can. And we know that in many cases has been a failed policy. Fire management is how do we manage that ignition in a way that helps us treat the landscape and protect the people, both now and into the future. The science has shown us this, that we need to take advantage of those opportunities to use that naturally ignited fire to burn up biomass so that when fire does come back through there, there's less fuel to burn. It's going to burn up, let's just say, a reduced impact, both smaller rate but also less intense. You have the advantage then of restoring some ecosystem health because you're getting rid of this unnaturally high biomass load. And you are going to have fire. You can manage that fire and deal with that fire with far less cost and, most importantly, far less exposure to your resources and the public those resources are trying to serve.
It's about 100 miles southwest of Albuquerque. They had these policies that they were letting these fires go, and they were, big fires, 30, 40,000 acres. So you fast forward into about 1996, 97. We had some big fire years, and 96 was a big one in Arizona and New Mexico. And we were on a fire on the Gila, and we were trying to suppress it, and we were having some difficulty on it. The local FMO, he said, if you just don't try, just let it come out of this drainage, it's going to come into a fire we had a year ago. And we did, we backed out, it came up out of there and it hit that fire from a couple of years ago. It laid down. We were able to basically just sort of kick it around, and we ended up not putting a lot of people into risk. I think over the next 20 years, we have seen how active management with fire on the Gila National Forest across the board has been super successful, and now you fast forward 25, 30 years, and it's in pretty good shape.
Some of the best protection you get is from previous wildfires. If you look at this last year, many of the biggest, nastiest fires either ran out of fuel because they moved into a different system or they hit a recent burn.
We can definitely use prescribed burning as part of the solution. But we need to do everything simultaneously. Unintentional ignitions are going to be the dominant impact on our landscape over the next several decades in the western US. And those unintentional ignitions have to be part of the solution.
You can see pretty much the extent of this burn here. This looks to me like maybe it's 20 or 30 acres in size, and that is a very small area compared with the amount of area that we need to be burning. If we need to be burning in the tens of millions of acres per year, every single year, imagine trying to do that 30 acres at a time. That is not going to happen. We are going to have to think much more expansively about how we address this problem. With prescribed fire, with taking advantage of natural ignitions or unplanned ignitions, expanding those to achieve exactly the same kind of effect, and that's easily possible. So when we're thinking about trying to address this problem at the scale necessary, we need to think about looking over the entire landscape for tens of miles in any direction and coming up with objectives for managing fire on that. You can use fire, both prescribed burning, but also have natural ignitions play an important role there. These are fire-dependent ecosystems. We have to have fire. We just don't have to have severe fires. If we're going to have to get that much landscape burned, we need to use all the sources of ignition in order to do that and to achieve effects like this. And if we are able to do that, we will not have a wildfire problem.
We have to fight the simple narrative of put fire out. We're hardwired to think about what's immediately in front of us, and we're easily manipulated to think about what's immediately in front of us and not take those longer-term perspectives. What we want in the future should matter.
Alpine in that area of San Diego. This was the largest fire in California history at that
So
time.
public education, success would be actually having like a fire-adapted community. Until we fundamentally redefine how it is we live with fire, I don't know how else we define success.
There are trade-offs out there around the fire problem, and we are paying for past decisions right now. There is a bill that has come due on us, and we have an opportunity to change the future, but we will have to pay for it.
I think we're at about 2/3 of normal in this area. Unfortunately, it's been a really light snow year. Climate change is definitely a big component of the fire risk that we are experiencing right now, but so is 100+ years of suppression. Dealing with climate change, adapting to climate change is going to take a lot of time. But how we manage fires, how we approach fires, and our suppression decisions are within our control, and we have some ability to bring fire to the landscape safely through our decisions on how we respond to fires. So it's going to cost a lot of money to get us out of this problem, but it's about the same as probably what it'll cost to keep us in the problem. And so we just have to do different work. A lot of the workforce already exists. The people who are suppressing fires are the same people who can bring fire onto the landscape. And what it requires is a different mindset and a different organizational structure and incentives for our people to get fire on the landscape. not to stop fire. Smoke has really emerged as a huge health concern for not just our firefighters, but the communities in general. The health costs and premature deaths associated with the smoke from these major wildfire seasons may actually be bigger than all the other costs combined. The solution, however, is smoke, but it's a different kind of smoke. It's a little less intense, it's spread throughout the year. That still has a lot of implications for people who are sensitive. We're going to have to figure out how to protect those people from our prescribed burning program that we're envisioning in the future.
In floodplains in this country, along about the 70s, we shifted our thinking. I was a kid in Loveland, Colorado, Big Thompson flood.
Over 140 people were killed.
Cheyenne, Wyoming, Rapid City, South Dakota. Mobile home parks in the lowlands. And big floods and people died.
And we have regulations that prevent people from building in certain floodplains.
Frequent flooding, frequent fire. I think what we've learned from and apply to this fire world that we currently live in comes out of what we've done with floodplains. To be able to anticipate those most vulnerable areas to frequent fire, use that part of the landscape for something different than homes and residential supported businesses. We can still use those landscapes for economic good. Let's just not have people live in harm's way.
So our communities and wildlands share fire, and the well-being of our communities is intimately linked to the health of our landscapes. Our wildlands need fire. Our communities can't have fire. The way these communities can stay safe is the design of the communities themselves. The structures, the immediate surroundings, and how the landscape's designed, where we allow people to develop. And there's a ton of work in how we make our communities more resilient to wildfire. By taking care of the communities, we can then get fire back into our wildlands more easily.
Insurance is actually going to have a really significant impact on this. Insurance is not going to pay out more money than they bring in over the long haul. You don't get to be one of the world's largest industries by giving away money.
So it's not only our insurance rates going up, but insurers are leaving certain areas. A couple of the biggest insurers in the country have left California because they can't recoup the costs from wildfire damages.
They're going to have significant impact on what new development looks like, what happens to existing development, and the cost and insurability of different communities. And as that impact starts to occur, that probably will spur some of the demands for something different.
Study as you go.
The fire problem was caused by a lack of fire that is now resulting in uncontrollable fires. The only solution to the fire problem is more controllable fires. To actually embrace that kind of thing, we can have all the best ideas in the world, but until someone that actually can direct things is gonna say, okay, we're gonna try that. That's what it takes to shift anything. Someone with power to actually do something differently.
Keep that devil off your back, don't give him any slack. Cry Jesus, Lord knows how the story goes, he'll carry all the load. Come Jesus, study, 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 study as you go.
There's a difference between leadership and management. We're where we are because of the sum total of people who pushed the easy button. So yeah, if you're in super bad conditions and you get a fire start and you go out and you're able to contain it, great. That might not have been a bad decision. Conversely, if you're in a really wet year and you get a fire start and you go and you put the fire out as small as possible, we've done that for a really long time and it led us to exactly right here.
Gonna run, gonna run, gonna run and let the spirit fly. I'm gonna run, I'm gonna run, I'm gonna run and let the spirit fly. I'm gonna run, I'm gonna run, I'm gonna run and let the spirit fly. Steady.
We have to really take a hard look at how we're responding to fire because we're not getting the outcomes we seek. To marry up risk management and decision making with more high-powered analytics and science, that's a dynamic duo. But Senator Jones wants to see the plane in the air. So we're going to put the plane in the air. That's the cycle we've got to stop. And we've got to tell Senator Jones, I get it. Your mental model, it makes sense. How many times have we shown you a picture of a slurry bomber, and that looks like you're doing everything you can to put that fire out? And Senator Jones, I can show you 25 fires right now where we did that, and it didn't make an ounce of difference. So Senator Jones, let's keep talking.
I think if I had a button to push, it would be helping those states develop their prescribed fire programs to help private landowners and the state lands that they have jurisdiction on really move forward with that. The states right now, with the bipartisan infrastructure legislation and now the Inflation Reduction Act to a degree, they're getting a lot of federal influx of dollars, and they have for years in various things. I think it's important for them to step up to move their fire organizations and in extension, the counties, right? These non-federal entities need to move beyond fire suppression to a fire management organization. I think they need to recognize that. I'll use the state of Montana. The state of Montana, under state law, that they're required to suppress every fire. So give their people the freedom to not feel like they always have to throw every resource they have in the world, throw people's lives at risk, and always feel like they have to keep the fire as small as it possibly can be. You know, give those people the freedom to really build a management organization that allows them to use management ignited prescribed fire so they can be treating ground as well. I'm going to direct my comments to the Forest Service district rangers and their counterparts, be that county commissioners, fire chiefs, state area managers, BLM area managers, those folks, that level of leadership, if you will, have the courage to redeem your responsibilities. And to those that they report to, be that leadership higher up and voters, whatever, have the integrity to support them when they have the courage to redeem their responsibilities.
Early on, I had a different vision of who I was. I was interested in materialistic things and wealth, and subconsciously, I think I came to public service trying to understand the complexity of why we're not doing better for each other and for the land.
To change the outcomes here and not have fire disasters. We know enough to do that, and we have for a long time. We're just not using that information. We're seeing the consequences of ignoring this. You know, whether it's 2,000-year-old trees being destroyed that you're never going to get back, communities burning to the ground, people losing their livelihoods. That is a reality. It's a direct consequence, an understandable consequence of the way we approach fire. And yet we don't have to do that.
This is not the Forest Services or the Park Services or the federal government's or state government's responsibility. It's all of our responsibilities, right? Including private landowners, where they build, including county zoning boards and county commissioners, what they allow to be built, including state governments. How can they redeem their responsibilities?
That is 695 copy. We're working that.
Oh, thank you, bro. I was so worried about you. Are you okay? I know you're probably sad for your horses right now, bro. I'm glad you're alive. God bless you, all right? I'm so glad you're okay. What's your name? I'm Britt. It's coming our way still, so move that way, okay? Freaking out. Hey, I'm glad you're okay. That guy who had the horses out there I was yelling and tracking, he got out too.
I think, we're talking about it. As much as it's not changing, as much as we would like to see it, as what we need to see, at least we're having those conversations. There's a quote from a letter that John Newton, the English pastor that wrote Amazing Grace, wrote to William Wilberforce during Wilberforce's attempt to end slavery in the British Empire. And it said, "You meet with many things that weary and disgust you, yet they are inseparable from your path of duty. Until you don't do all the good you wish for, some good is done." It's all about duty.